Welcome to the new format for Great Lakes Church online and the Great Lakes Church podcast. Services now available on demand Sundays at 9 o'clock a.m. Central. Announcements available at the beginning of each service. To skip to the talk, please refer to the timestamps in the description. Enjoy the service.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Great Lakes Church. My name is Carson. I'm one of your hosts around here. If you've been here a while, you probably know that. You might be familiar with me. If you are just meeting me for the first time, you have yet to learn what a nightmare I am. But I'm so excited that you're here for the first time because we love celebrating our first timers in a special way around here at Great Lakes Church, whether you're in person or online. We have a gift for you. If you're in one of our physical spaces, grab that yellow connection card in the seat back pocket in front of you. Fill it out with as much information as you feel comfortable, and then bring it to the Next Steps table in the lobby. They're gonna swap you there for a free t-shirt. If you're joining us online, you can still fill out the connection card at greatlakechurch.com or in the app, and we're gonna send you a mystery gift right to your doorstep. This last season of being at Great Lakes, kicking off fall together, has been like a runaway train. There is so much going on. It is hard to keep up sometimes, but now we're entering a season to breathe a little bit, and you can get involved in a couple ways at your leisure, super low commitment. We've got a lot of events coming up, which you can find at our events page at greatlakechurch.com, but we also have some serving groups just around the corner. These groups are an opportunity to meet people, to connect, and to do good for our communities here, near, and far. There's all kinds of ways that you can get plugged in, but it's really low commitment, which, if I'm honest with you, I like that. I like that I can just show up one time and not think about it after that. I'd invite you to consider doing the same. One of the events that we have this season is with an organization called Soul Hope. They're also one of our mission partners. We've allocated funds to them before because we believe the work they do is really important. But maybe you don't know anything about who they are or what they do. Check this out.
We are Soul Hope. Our mission is offering hope, healthier lives, and freedom from foot-related diseases through education, jobs, and medical relief. In Uganda, parasites called jiggers burrow themselves in the feet and hands of vulnerable children and the elderly. With simple hygiene, education, and proper shoes, jiggers can be prevented, and those affected can gain back their quality of life. Our role is simple. Wash every foot by hand, inspect and remove every jigger, provide every child with new shoes to protect their feet, and give them education to remain jigger-free. By doing this, Soul Hope gives children back their freedom to run, to play, to laugh, and to simply be a kid again.
So now you know, when you plug into a group and you serve at Great Lakes Church, or when you allocate your finances to be generous at Great Lakes Church, it empowers people in the building and in our backyard here in Southeast Wisconsin, but really it has an impact far beyond us, all over the world, and we think that matters so much. So thanks for getting on board with us. Thanks for being a part of being a wildly generous church. If you'd like to join us in this endeavor, you can go to greatlakechurch.com and give on the give page. You can grab the blue giving envelope in the seat back pocket in front of you if you came with a physical gift today. Put it in there and drop it in the silver giving station on your way out. Regardless of how you choose to get involved, thanks for getting involved. We are excited to continue a series that we're in called My Story as we explore the books of 1st and 2nd Peter. This series is taking us through group season, teaching us how to live together and to be the church. We are so excited about it and hope you enjoy the talk.
Well, over the past 3 years, I have spent more than 300 hours sitting in trees waiting for Big Daddy. Now, if you're new around here, hey, it's fall, so that means I'm going to talk about deer hunting. All right, some people love to talk about football, baseball, basketball, golf. I'm going to talk about hunting, and all I need you to know is that after 300 hours of sitting in blinds and in tree stands, Big Daddy, 10-pointer, finally showed up last Friday evening. And it was the most fun and dramatic hunt that I think I have ever had. I am sitting in my tree, and about 4:30 in the afternoon, I see a little bit of movement behind me. I look, and there is Big Daddy just slowly walking. And so I take my crossbow, which is like a low-powered rifle, and I start to move in that direction. And I kid you not, it's like Houdini, it was gone. And so I just kept saying, where did this go? And the only thing I could think was we had 5 or 6 trees about 20 yards from me. And I don't know why I say we, like I have multiple personality disorder, but I have 5 or 6 trees about 20 yards from me and some brush that it's possible it was kind of down in the brush. And so I just kept looking. I got out the binoculars. I couldn't see it, but I was just convinced it is in there. And so for 45 minutes, I kind of contorted my body and just kept, and then eventually I'm hurting, but I just kept that weapon on it, right? And so finally, 45 minutes, I realized it went somewhere, but apparently not in there. And so I just continued on. Well, about 6:30 at night, I knew I had to be in at 7. I go to check my watch, and I have a what is this called, Apple Watch. And when I went to check it, I accidentally pinged my phone. Now, I've never done this before, okay? So this is literally what happens. Everything else is silent. I'm like, what'd I just do? I didn't even know I could do this. And so I'm like, well, I only have 30 minutes left. I'm just going to start getting my stuff. So I start grabbing some stuff. And out of the corner of my eye, Big Daddy was down in the brush. And now it's out. And it's not spooked. It's just curious. So it's just kind of walking around. And then I'm up in the tree over here, and the deer is looking straight ahead. And so I'm like, I'm not going to move because this thing's going to see something in the peripheral vision. So I'm just kind of frozen there. And then this is where your prayers have come through for me, ladies and gentlemen. Somebody came to a gate which was 100 yards away, and it's a gate to a private road, and they were messing with the locks. So I think, well, the deer's going to run. The deer does not run. The deer goes from facing this direction to that direction. So now I've got this shot on this body. I am up here, and I'm like, people have been quoting scriptures over me. People have been doing this. This is awesome. So I was able to get my shot off with the deer only 15 yards away. Awesome. So let me show you a picture of Big Daddy. Let's show a picture of the deer. Oh, that's right. I missed. Guys, 15, 20 yards away. I missed this deer. Now, if you have never heard of the term buck fever, it is when you are so overcome with excitement that you have like a flu-like reaction to seeing a large buck. All right, loss of breath, uncontrollable shaking, you can't think straight, and so it's very easy to miss a shot. And if you do, you feel tremendous shame, embarrassment, depression, and PTSD. And I've had all of that in the past week. I've had a hard time sleeping. I'm not exaggerating because I just keep replaying it. How did I miss that? It's right there. It's right there. Now, I don't expect you to care, right? I don't expect you to empathize with me. I told a buddy who hunts, I told him on, last week when I got back, I said, hey, here's what happened to me. And so then I saw him a little bit later, and he's like, yeah, just totally missed, because that's what it's like when you're trying to hold the crossbow. You're like, oh, I got to shoot this thing, right? But I don't expect you to have that much empathy because you have not sat in the cold and the rain and in the wind, waiting and waiting and waiting, passing on deer after deer after deer, kind of like high school when I used to pass on girl after girl after girl because I knew what I was waiting for, right? So even my wife, who's watched me go through this whole thing, her response was, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm like, really? That's it? Now, last week, we kicked off a brand new teaching series called My Story. Throughout this series, we're zeroing in on 2 specific books of the Bible called 1st and 2nd Peter. All right, these were letters written by the disciple Peter to followers of Jesus in the first century. All right, these were people living in Asia Minor, which is part of modern-day Turkey, and at the time, it was part of the Roman Empire. So Emperor Nero was large and in charge. The readers of this letter, of these letters, were on the receiving end of persecution because of their faith. They're facing an increasing amount of hostility and harassment from their Greek and Roman neighbors. As hard as we try, as much as we try to understand and empathize, we are not going to truly be able to understand what they were experiencing. We can try to care, we can try to get into their world, but we are not living their lives. And the reason I bring this up is because every so often I hear someone, whether it's on the news or in person, make a statement that seems to suggest that followers of Jesus in the United States are experiencing persecution. Now, that is just not true. I want to caution all of us, right? We need to be careful about labeling any resistance or pushback we get because of our faith or because of our beliefs as persecution. As followers of Jesus in the United States, we're on the receiving end of what can be called inconvenient, right? We're on the receiving end at times of something that might even be painful for whatever reason, maybe even illegal based on the laws that we have here in America. But we are not on the receiving end of true persecution. And the people receiving these letters were living in fear of being tortured, blamed for crimes they didn't commit, being fed to lions, because all of that stuff was happening in the city of Rome. And there was fear that now it was going to make its way throughout the rest of the empire. So I think one of the closest examples that we have to what they were experiencing is North Korea. In North Korea, if you're caught with the Bibles or you're singing a hymn or you're praying, you can face up to 15 years in a labor camp where you work 12 hours a day and you are frequently beaten with metal rods. All right, you try to escape, you're going to be shot, you're going to be tortured. So imagine Peter writing a letter that goes to churches that look like this. They're just small house churches, and his letter is being passed from church to church. Right now, it's estimated that 60,000 Christians are imprisoned in North Korea in their prison system or their labor camps. But I just want to be very clear. It's impossible for us to understand and totally relate to what they're going through, and yet there are big lessons we can take away. There are themes that we can pull from, and we mentioned this last week. Here they are. Peter in his letters talks about remaining hopeful in the midst of suffering, staying united in the midst of division, living well in the midst of injustice, and holding on to truth in the midst of lies and deception. So last week we talked a lot about the disciple Peter who wrote these letters. Peter had a reputation for being brash and indecisive and unpredictable and outspoken. But then Jesus was crucified. His leader, his master, crucified. A few days later, Peter finds himself standing face to face with the resurrected Jesus. And in that moment, transformed him. Peter went on to become one of the greatest leaders in the history of the church. And so here he is, 30 years later, and he's writing a letter to followers of Jesus who are being marginalized and mistreated. These are people trying desperately to hold on to their faith in spite of persecution. And so Peter writes these letters to encourage them and challenge them to stand strong in the midst of what they're experiencing. It's a handwritten, custom letter. When is the last time you got one of those? Right, we get a lot of junk mail, don't we? We get a lot of spam phone calls and spam texts and spam emails. I mean, every single day I go to the mailbox, just kind of a routine when I get home, and it is the exact same routine. I walk out of my house, I go to the mailbox, and I grab the mail. That's what I do. And then I look at it while I'm going into the house, and I walk over to the trash, and I throw it away. Every single day, all my neighbors do the same thing. It's like we could save the mail carrier a whole lot of time, couldn't we, if they just didn't deliver the mail, and they just brought it to the trash or a landfill, and they just said that's where it goes. But the reason they don't do that, of course, is because every so often, and it's a rare occasion, we actually get something meaningful. We get something very, very special, right? So over the years, I've kept some of those special things. This is from the last 14 years of being part of Great Lakes Church, thank you letters and encouraging notes that I write myself. And no, but what happens is when you receive a handwritten letter, a card or a note, does anybody else do this? You keep it? Yeah, you keep it. Why? Because somebody took time. Well, in the first century, producing a letter was very time-consuming and expensive. Imagine, you just have to think about like the time period, right? First of all, you had to be a somewhat educated person to be able to spell, to be able to write, to understand how to do this. You had to be able to compose a letter. And so often what someone would do is they find somebody who had those kind of skills, and that's what Peter did. In fact, at the end of his first letter, here's what Peter writes. He says, I have written and sent this short letter to you with the help of Silas or Silvanus. Writing a letter takes time, and the person composing the letter has to take notes and make drafts and be very careful in the writing process because they can't just hit, delete. They can't just have whiteout, right? They have to be very careful. And once the letter is complete, it then has to be delivered over land and sea. And the reason I give you that backdrop and the reason I tell you that is because when these first century believers received a letter from the disciple Peter, there was a lot of excitement. Everyone in the church would come together and the letter would be read aloud, right? Because they didn't have these massive facilities where 20,000 people would gather together. They were house churches, more or less. And so husbands and wives and families were on the receiving end of persecution. They're wondering how they're going to make it another year. They're wondering how they're going to survive with everything going on in their world. And they received this letter from the disciple Peter. And they're so excited to hear what he has to say to them. And Peter, in his first letter, he just starts off, he introduces himself, and he kind of does a shout out to his intended audience. He said, here's who this letter is for. And then immediately after writing his name and who the letter is for, Peter writes this. He says, God the Father knew you and chose you long ago. So here's Peter. He's dictating this letter to Silas. It's very likely he's thinking of his own story. It's very likely he's thinking about how decades earlier, he's on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and Jesus walks up to him and selects him and picks him and chooses him. He says, Peter, I want you to be one of my disciples. I want you to follow me. I want you to learn from me. And so here's Peter decades later, and he's saying to these followers of Jesus, just like I was chosen by Jesus, he has chosen you. You are called by him. You are selected by him. Now, over the years, my wife and I, we've been very open about the fact that we adopted our son, Jaden, back in 2006. Now, we haven't told him yet, so don't say anything. Right? But here's the deal. A lot of families, when they adopt, they celebrate something called a gotcha day. Now, gotcha day is the day that they were either adopted into the family, or if they want, they can celebrate, and I know families that do this, the day that they actually met the child for the first time. But it's kind of this gotcha day that, hey, this was the day that you became part of our family. We chose you. It's a celebration. And so Peter says, man, you ought to celebrate the fact that God knew you. Way before you were born, he knew who you were, and he chose you. And then he adds this. He says, and his Spirit has made you holy. Now, I'm guessing that holy isn't a word you use very often, unless it's followed by an expletive for some of you, right? But the word holy is found more than 600 times in our Bible. If you had to pick one attribute to describe God, my guess is that you'd probably pick love, right? Love, kindness, compassion, grace, mercy. That is absolutely something I would pick. But do you realize that the number one attribute used to describe God throughout the various books that make up our Bible is the word holy? Holy means set apart. Holy means sacred. It means pure. It means untainted. God is separate than us, right? God is different than us. He is in a category all by himself. And yet here is Peter, and he's saying to his readers, I want you to know that God is making you holy. You've been chosen by God. You're part of his family. You've been set apart from God, by God. And now his Spirit is actively at work making you holy. He's separating the new you from the old you. God's Spirit is actively at work, chiseling away at your self-centeredness and your doubts and your pride and your insecurity and your greed and your inability to believe that God fully loves you and your inability to believe that God fully accepts you. He's separating the old you from the new you. And I want you to know that you are not like everyone else. That's what Peter's saying. You are not like everyone else. You're different now. Your way of doing life isn't going to make sense to everyone else. So can you imagine you're at home by yourself later this week and you call 911 to report yourself because you're drunk and you're punching things? You're like, I'm just calling because I shouldn't be doing these things, right? Or you call 911 because you got someone coming over and you know you're about to have an affair and you just want to call and tell on yourself. Or you call and you say, hey, you tell the operator, I just want you to know I'm addicted to gambling. I'm behind my computer right now and I am, just blowing through my life savings. Or, hey, the reason I'm calling you is to tell on myself because I just went on social media and I just spread gossip, rumors. I did something that could potentially hurt somebody, like in their mind and in their heart. The police are not going to show up because there is a big difference between a crime and a sin. A crime is a transgression against humans, right? It's when you break a civil law. A sin is a transgression against God. A sin is when you do something that stands in opposition to the character of God. So God is love. Anything I do that opposes love, that works against love, that's sin. God is holy. Anything I do morally, ethically, that would work against holiness, that would make something that is pure impure, that would be sin. And so Peter is telling his readers, hey, I want you to know, you've been made new by God, you've been chosen by him, and he's at work making you holy, which means your standards, your convictions, your beliefs, they are not always going to be in alignment with everyone around you. It says, it's obvious you understand this. Because he goes on, he says, as a result, you have obeyed him. As a result of understanding who you are and what God is doing in your life, it's obvious that you are now trying to live it out. Now, I mentioned this last week, but it is important to understand that who we are is fully determined by God. It's not determined by what we do and who we know and all that fun stuff. It is determined by God. And once we understand that who we are is determined by God, our behavior can line up with who we are created to be. So God says, you are made in my image. You are my child. You are completely loved. You are fully wanted. You are a masterpiece. You are a new creation. I have chosen you. I have selected you. You are mine. Knowing that is a big, big deal. And if we don't know who we are, what happens is we'll continually face frustration and discouragement and defeat because we will spend our lives living in a way that doesn't match up to the truest version of ourselves. We'll be doing things we were never created to do. So if I took a book and I attached this to a pole and I just decided that I was going to sweep an entire building with this book attached to a pole, theoretically I could do it, right? Absolutely. But it's going to be discouraging because it wasn't made for that, right? If you're at home and you run out of toilet paper and you have duct tape, theoretically, right? Theoretically, you could use it. But it wasn't created for that, and so it would be very frustrating. Maybe dangerous, right? When we use something in a way that it was never created for or intended to be used, it becomes incredibly frustrating and discouraging. When you choose to live your life in a way that does not match up to who God created you to be, come on, it's going to be frustrating. It's going to feel discouraging. Right? Just think of anything, right? God created us in his image, which means just like God, we're generous. We're supposed to live life open-handed. This is how we're supposed to live. You ever been around someone who just walks through life taking? They live life with closed fists. Every time you go out to eat with them, it's time to pay. It's like they got some sort of backache, how slow they go to reach for that wallet. Let me ask you, are they really that fun to be around? No, people who go through life taking, they're not fun to be around. Right? It's not a joy to be around them. God created us to love and to encourage each other. You ever found yourself caught up in gossip? Or you're just unleashing anger on someone and belittling them? How do you feel afterwards? It's not like you go to bed at night feeling content and complete because of what you said. Why? Because you weren't created for that. And so Peter wants his readers to understand that the way we live and our behavior is supposed to be impacted by how we see ourselves. And how we see ourselves ought to be based on what God says about us. And so Peter commends his readers for understanding that they belong to God, they've been marked by him, that he's chiseling away at their heart to make them holy, make them more and more like Jesus. And he says, you're living like that. You're living accordingly. And I commend you for that. And then what he does next is he reminds them of what God has done for them. He writes, all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. It is by his great mercy that we have been born again, because God raised Jesus Christ from the dead. Now, to be born again means to be made new. So Peter says, who you are has changed. A couple of weeks ago, I officiated a wedding for a couple, 5 hours away, and I had to leave right away when it was done. All right, so I leave, I take the marriage certificate, the envelope, and everything in it, and I go home. Now, I do this at every wedding, right? Done it for years, don't even think about it. The couple reaches out and they say, hey, do you have that paperwork by any chance? And it has the address of where we're supposed to get this marriage certificate, and it's got the information of all the places we're supposed to, use it for. And so do you have that? And I said, no, I got rid of it. I mean, that's what I always do, right? You don't really need this stuff. Believe me, I'm a pastor. I've been doing this for years. You don't really need this stuff. I said, well, we think we do. And so I started thinking about it, and I called the Register of Deeds. And I said, hey, I want to ask you about this marriage certificate. I sent a link so they could fill that out. But really, why do you need a marriage certificate? Like, I've never gone to anybody's house and had it, plastered on a wall. And to be honest with you, I don't remember the last time I used the marriage certificate. And the Register of Deeds says, all right, just start getting ready, write this down. All right, the bride will need it to update her Social Security card, driver's license, car registration. If her name's on the mortgage, she'll need it for that. Passport, credit cards, any bills for utility companies, insurance companies. I'm like, oh, I guess you need it. I'm not going to take the whole envelope again. Now listen, I'm a guy, and I feel really insensitive, but I've just never had to use it. I suppose if I would have really engaged my mind, I could have thought of some reasons you might need. I didn't think about it. And so Peter is telling his readers, who you are has changed. You have been labeled by God in a different way. You've been born again. You are a new creation. It's a big deal. He goes on to write, now we live with great expectation. Some translations say, now we have a living hope. Right? When we think of hope, most of us tend to think of something that we desire to happen. Right? So when I proposed to my wife, I hoped she would say yes. Right? When the Packers play, I hope they will win. If you play the lottery, right, you hope that you're going to have the winning ticket. But here's the deal. Hope can only be as strong as the person or thing we place it in. So if I propose to someone who doesn't know me, it's not a big chance, right? If you play the Powerball, you obviously, hoping you win, your chances are 1 in 292 million. The Bears have a better chance of going to the Super Bowl this year. Right? The kind of hope that Peter is writing about is not this wishful thinking. It's not the, man, this would be really nice if this happened. It is a guaranteed, assured outcome. It's an anchor that keeps us grounded. And so he actually takes a few sentences and he reminds his readers that their hope is fully found in the fact that Jesus has come back from the dead. Now again, very personal to Peter. Just a couple days prior to the resurrection, he's denying any association with Jesus. He's saying, I don't know who you're talking about. And then he comes face to face with the resurrected Jesus, and it changes him. He's saying, man, there's something to this. And so he's saying our hope is found in the fact that we serve a living God. Our hope is found in the fact that we believe someday every wrong will be made right, everything that's broken will be fixed, and everything that is in disarray will be restored. God will put it back as it was intended from the beginning. Our ultimate hope is not in political theories or philosophical systems. It's not in any hashtag. It's not in any emotional responses to anything. Those things are great, but ultimately our hope is in a living God. And this is so important. Because like all of you, when I look around at the world, I understand why people are fearful. I understand why people are deconstructing their faith. I understand why people are living in despair. I get that. And it's very easy to go down that route. But what keeps me going personally is I do believe that Jesus was resurrected. I do believe that God is alive. I do believe that someday a living God is going to make all things right. And this is why Peter goes on to write, so be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. He says, come on, be truly glad. There's joy ahead. Our hope is not found in something, it's found in someone. He says, so it's possible to have joy. It's possible to stand strong in the midst of difficulty because your hope isn't based on your financial status. It's not based on who you know. It's not based on your physical health. It's not based on all your relationships. It's not based on whether or not life turns out the way you imagined it would be. It's not based on what people think of you. Now, in the New Testament, which is the second half of our Bible, it contains 27 books, right? The Bible's a library of books, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament. In the New Testament, the word hope appears 71 times. It occurs one time before the resurrection and 70 times after. Now, I did not go to Harvard. I turned down that opportunity. Right? But here's the deal. It doesn't take a genius to see that our hope comes from the reality we follow. We serve a living God. This is why the Apostle Paul, at one time in one of his letters, says, if Jesus did not raise from the dead, our hope, all of this is useless. The faith is just, we're buying into a lie. And so Peter is saying, man, we've got hope. We can stand strong. He goes on to explain. He says, these trials you're going through will show you that your faith is genuine. It's being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. The trials or difficulties in our life, Peter's saying, hey, they can serve a purpose. Now, we all hate trials, right? When we go through them, let's be honest, we feel like God's against us. I definitely don't encourage us to chase them. There'll be enough without chasing them, right? Truth is that when we think about the difficulties in our life, a lot of times there are things we brought on ourselves. We did something, now we have the consequences. Or somebody else did something, now we're living in the fallout of their decisions. That's just the reality of life, right? But often, the difficulties we go through are the result of living in a broken world. Again, we don't want to chase this stuff, we don't want to go after it, but they're a reality of life. And regardless of why we're going through difficulty or trials, they can serve a purpose. And Peter just mentioned one of those purposes. He says that trials in many ways reveal your faith. He says it shows your faith is genuine. He says in the same way that fire refines and purifies gold, trials can reveal whether or not our faith is genuine and sincere. Now, this is important because in some places around the world, if you claim to be a follower of Jesus, it's going to cost you your life. You're going to be in prison. You're going to go to some sort of camp, right? Some prison camp. So you better think twice or three times before you decide, I'm going to tell people that I'm a follower of Jesus. In the United States, it's so easy to wear the label Jesus follower that just unbelievable amounts of people do it, and they don't even give it any thought. And so Peter, he takes time here to write about genuine faith. And it's possible that as he's writing about this, that he's recalling a story that Jesus told decades earlier about different types of faith. Because at one point, Jesus was telling a story, and he used the metaphor of a farmer planting seed. And Jesus talks about how the farmer is scattering seed, and some of it falls onto a pathway, and before the seeds are able to take root, birds come down and eat the seed. And he's basically talking about people who have inherited their faith. If they don't really have a faith of their own, what they've done is they've latched onto their parents' faith. So you say, hey, are you a follower of Jesus? Do you have faith? And they say, well, I grew up Lutheran. I grew up Catholic. I grew up Baptist or Pentecostal, or I went to this church, and so I guess that's what I am. But it never took root in their own heart, and so it's easy for their faith to be taken away because it wasn't their own. And one of the things I love so much about Great Lakes Church, in the last probably 6 months, it just seems like more and more young adults are joining us, and more young adults are saying, hey, this faith is my own. It's not my parents' faith. And God's doing something, and it's exciting. We ought to celebrate that. Jesus goes on, and he talks about how other seed fell onto shallow soil, and it did take root. But eventually, the hot sun caused the young plant to wither and die. And so it was done. He's talking about people with a shallow faith. These are people who, they follow God, but all of a sudden something happens, and then their attitude is, well, I could never follow a God that would allow me to go through this. These are people, when the pressures of life start piling up, their faith starts to wither. Next, Jesus talks about seed that fell among thorns. They take root, they start to grow, but eventually the plants are choked out. These are people with conditional faith. These are people who say, man, I've got so much going on right now. I just don't have time to fit Jesus into the margins of my life. Don't have time to build my life around him. I have a buddy who recently was explaining to me, they don't attend Great Lakes Church, but they say, man, God has been so faithful. I have been tithing for the last decade of my life, 10% of my money. God continually blesses me, and every year I've gotten a raise, and I'm going to continue to give as long as he is faithful to me in this way. And he was dead serious. I said, wow, it seems like you're holding God hostage. You're going to be faithful to him as long as he blesses you in the way you want. And to his credit, he said, man, I never thought about it that way. Listen, if you have a conditional faith, I promise you it's only a matter of time before it gets choked out altogether. And eventually, Jesus does go on to talk about seed that falls into fertile soil and produces fruit. But the point Peter's making is that difficulties and trials we go through have a way of revealing the sincerity of our faith and where our hope is. He's not trying to shame anybody. He's not trying to scare you into questioning, am I really a follower of Jesus? I mean, he's aware of the fact that 30 years earlier, when he was confronted on 3 different occasions about being a disciple of Jesus, he denied it every time. And he had some pretty weak faith. But he's telling people, hey, good can come out of trials. It can show you how deep your faith is. Here's what Peter writes next. He says, so when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. In high school, I played basketball. I'm guessing you read about me. But I remember the first day of practice every year, we would have to do the half-court sprints and full-court sprints. And it was ridiculous, right? And I'd always feel like I'm going to vomit right afterwards, like, I can't do this. I still hate running. But then when we do the next practice, we do them again, and the next practice. And eventually what happens is you get a little stronger every time. You build up some more endurance. And that's what Peter's saying. He's saying trials make us stronger. When you choose to endure trials and you go through difficulties because you understand who you are and whose you are, you become stronger. And we all need to know this because we're going to go through difficult times. This past Sunday, man, what an incredible night. We baptized 41 individuals, and for Great Lakes Church, we passed the 1,000 mark of baptism since our church's history. Isn't that awesome? Very moving, very motivational, very monumental type of evening. And I can't help but think it's so easy for someone to believe, especially if they're young, that just following Jesus and being baptized, and there's so much great things happening right now, it's very easy to convince ourselves that following Jesus is going to lead to a pain-free, problem-free, stress-free life. But that is not true. And the disciple Peter never promises his readers that their life is going to get better on this side of eternity. I mean, he wants it to, right? Of course, he's praying for it to get better. But the focus of his letters is reminding his readers that there is another life on the other side of this life. And we can't lose hope. And so he writes, you love Jesus even though you've never seen him, right? Or love God even though you've never seen him. Though you do not see him now, you trust him. And you rejoice with a glorious, inexpressible joy. When you know who you are and who God created you to be, when you have a living hope or a great expectation in someone and not something, then you can go through trials and still experience joy because you are able to live your life in a way that is in alignment with the one who created you and the one who loves you and has marked you and has chosen you. He's saying joy doesn't have to be determined by our circumstances. That doesn't mean we walk around with a fake smile plastered on our face or that we have to deny our pain is real. But it means we get to decide what we focus on. Right? It's like being on a train and you're passing through the mountains. On one side of the train is a high mountain. You're running very close to it, and all you can see is this dark shadow as you pass by. On the other side are magnificent views, right? Valleys, meadows, streams, lakes, trees. What are you going to look at? I can focus on my pain and my trials and my difficulties, or I can focus on the hope I have in Jesus and the fact he is with me in whatever I go through. And so my hope for us is that would be the focus of our lives when we are going through difficulty and trials and challenges and pain. That we will say, I'm staying hopeful because I serve a living God and I do believe that this is not the end of the story. He has the power to heal. He has the power to bring freedom and relief and restoration, but it may not happen on this side of eternity. But I do believe on the other side, he's making all things new. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I pray that as your followers, we would stay hopeful, we would stay focused, we would not lose sight of the fact we serve a living God, and that would carry us through difficult times. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for joining us. But the fun doesn't have to stop here. You can hang out with us every day at greatlakeschurch.com, the Great Lakes Church app, or on socials at Great Lakes Church. We'll see you next time.